Who, in some ways, it reminds me of the British monarchy a little bit, right? You used to have a British monarch who actually ran the country, and at a certain point, it just became a ceremonial figure, all the pomp and circumstance that you hold up as a figure, but really just ends up becoming a figurehead, an aged king that might or might not suffer from dementia. That's effectively what the United States has become, which is part of why we see the level of weakness on the global stage, why we see the loss of self-confidence in this country. For a country that you just have the pageantry of a monarch that isn't actually the functioning leader of the country, that too, I think, is a pretty big problem. And Kamala Harris, I think, has an opportunity here. Whether she seizes it or not is a different question. If she steps up and is actually authentic about that question, says, you know what, we weren't particularly honest about where President Joe Biden was, and we deserve a government where the people in charge just tell you the truth. Say it like it is. You might like it, you might not like it, but I'm going to tell you what my beliefs are. And I don't want a bunch of lobbyists and bureaucrats around me wielding me as a pawn. And so here are my actual beliefs.
And I mean, to be honest, I think I could get behind that message personally. And I think a lot of other Americans can as well. Like, look, we understand we dropped the ball on A, B, and C. We understand that there's some questions, some looming questions, as I said. You know, there's some distrust from, you know, how things appeared. I want to answer those questions. I want to ease everybody's discomfort. I plan on solving these issues in this way. Just elect me as president, smooth sailing. She could galvanize a lot of people with that type of message, but Kamala's so... like I've always said, she's not a statesman or a stateswoman, so she can't get up there and articulate that point just like that.
And you know what? I might have said this back in 2018 or 2019, but I changed my mind. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't say it. I changed my mind. Here's why I'm in a different place on fracking, or here's why I don't favor nationalizing the healthcare system anymore. Because these are things she said in the past. It looks like she's, you know, her advisors are trying to say that she doesn't support that anymore. I think take the opposite approach. Just be totally upfront and say, you know what? Here's what I believe then. Here's what I believe now. Here's why I changed my mind. I'm not going to be anybody's puppet. I report to you, the people of the country. I'm different than Joe Biden because he was wielded as a puppet. I think that'd be bold.
She can't do that.
And well, I think a lot of the next generation.
Yeah, they are all puppets.
So mostly,
Trump
actually,
is a puppet.
For most, well, you know what's interesting about
he plays
him,
the role of, you know, being this maverick who's draining the swamp, but he's a
so I'll
puppet.
certainly give you the 2016 view because
And Charlemagne makes a good point right there. And, you know, it's been discussed by a lot of pundits and social commentators alike. Like, yeah, this time around is a little bit different for Trump. Like, he's funded, whereas the first time, I think he did have some funding, but it was mostly his own personal pocket. So, you know, when you're taking money from folks, regardless of what side you're on, they're going to want you to say and act a certain way. So his brand is a little bit more safe now, which is still funny because they still vilify this man for being divisive. But to say Trump is a puppet is a fair assessment. I'll just get here and say it. You know, when you get to a certain level, when you're hoping to be the president of the United States, there's a certain level of influence that is gonna be had on you regardless.
Credit where credit's due.
And he might be a puppet for foreign interference. That's the problem.
I think that's
for Russia and China.
So I think that the whole Russia hoax, that thing's played itself out, and that actually ended up being a little bit of mythology. But back in 2016, here's one of the things I like about Donald Trump. Say what you will. In the Republican Party, it was complete orthodoxy to support the Iraq War, to say that was a good thing. That was where the Republican Party was in 2015. And he was the only person on that debate stage that said this is idiotic, that we invaded the country that had nothing to do with 9/11 in the name of 9/11. That was idiotic. And now it's the Republican Party position, at least most people, to accept that was actually a bad idea. So if you're able to go into a room full, say it's a political party, and tell them something that's different than what the majority of the people in that room believe, and then eventually they change their mind, that's a real mark of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. Now, I think Kamala Harris has an opportunity now because The opportunity she has is she didn't have to
Appreciate
go through a
everybody tuning in.
primary.
Make sure to go ahead and like the
Going
video,
through a primary
man.
is interesting because it forces
Appreciate the
you
chat,
to actually
man.
bend the knee to, let's say, the far whatever wing of your own party and take criticism unless you do. She didn't have to do that. So she has an opportunity now to take advantage of that and say, I'm starting with a clean slate and I'm actually just changing the game for the system. I don't see her doing that yet. Maybe you're saying she can't do that. I don't know why she can't do that. If she's the actual president, she has an opportunity to step up and lead.
If she's the actual president, if she's not a puppet, if she has an actual voice of her own, and this is all alleged, this is all hearsay. I don't claim to know all the inner workings of what's actually going on, and of course, I don't know Kamala personally, but she's Biden 2.0 in a sense where she's just carrying out his policy. She hasn't came out and said anything different from what the Biden administration has already stated or already enacted over the last 4 years. So for her to come, turn about face, almost do a 180 and accept accountability, responsibility for some of the balls dropped, and then not only that, be able to say, but look, if you vote for me, I'm going to fix these issues and I'm going to lead us in the right direction. Be honest, she's just not there.
But you know what? Just speaking as an American, I'm not voting for Kamala Harris. I'm going to vote for Trump on policy. But if she came out and said, you know what, here's my stance on cryptocurrency. Okay, Donald Trump came out with the Bitcoin policy. Here's my policy. Here's my position on AI. Here's my position on the border. You know what? I was the vice president, but Joe Biden did some things that I disagree with. Here's how I would do it differently. I would at least respect her for that. If she doesn't do that, that tells me actually it's not that she's some sort of ideologue or some communist or whatever. Some people level that critique. I don't think that's the real critique. I think the real critique is then you just become another cog in the system. And what I'm interested in breaking that system. And I want the people we elect to run the government to be the ones who actually run the government. Whether I agree with you or not, at least the person who was elected should actually be running the show. And I just don't.
Yeah, and if you're sitting here like, man, this guy's cooking. Who is this? This is Vivek Ramaswamy. He was a Republican hopeful candidate for president. And yeah, he does have some good takes. Like he's all for the last point he's making actually, he's all for the elimination of the deep state. You know, these alphabet agencies and these American oligarchs and whatnot, who allegedly have a lot of influence on what goes on.
Don't believe that's the case in the United States today.
Is that possible to do when you have these politicians who take all of this money on both sides?
No, that's a good question. Good point. I'm pretty
So I
much.
said she can't do. She's raising all this money.
But Democrats
now.
or Republicans can't do it.
Yeah.
Like if you're taking all this money from lobbyists, how can you ever do that?
Or from Super PAC, what I call the Super PAC industrial complex. So the thing is actually back in 2010, the Democrats used to be dead set against the rise of super PACs. So remember the corporations are not people debate. That was around a case called Citizens United. What they effectively said is, okay, if you can't beat them, join them. So now you have the amount of super PAC money flowing in to support Democrats actually is greater than that using to support Republicans. But they're saying, hey, if we got the money flowing in, then we're not going to, if you can't beat the game, play the game. And I think both parties are worse off for it because the people who really determine the politicians' stances aren't really the people of the country. It's the people who effectively fund the mother's milk of American politics. And I think that's bad for Democrats and Republicans in the United States of America alike. So I would favor a policy. I think Donald Trump or Kamala Harris would do well to come out with this to say, if you've worked in the government, you're banned from lobbying the government for at least 10 years after you leave. Neither candidate has adopted that position. I think it's a winning position.
We might get a little more honesty then.
I think you might get a little, that's a risk. To some people view that as a risk. I view that as an opportunity. But yes, I think you'd get a lot more honesty. I don't think, it's a small one. I mean, I don't think congressmen should be trading individual stocks or bureaucrats should be trading individual stocks.
That's
while they're in
inside
office.
trading. Because they're probably getting
how does it
tips.
benefit the public? Is that the question? Does it serve the interests of the public? I fail to see how. Absent that argument, ban lobbying for 10 years after you leave office. Ban the trading of individual stocks if you're a government bureaucrat regulating an industry.
Say names, Vivek.
You probably shouldn't be able to join that industry.
Say
for at
names.
least 10
Why you don't
years.
want to say Nancy Pelosi?
Well, I mean, because I don't like saying the things everybody's always. Nancy Pelosi's, of course, guilty of this, but I'm a Republican. It's easy to just pick on Nancy Pelosi today. So I hate saying things that are piling on when other people are piling on. But yes, it's true. That includes Nancy Pelosi. Probably includes some Republicans too.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, because I know I'll have somebody in the chat who maybe knows the finer details a little bit more well than I do. But they were also coming at Trump for doing essentially what Vivek said and he was trying to limit people who had been in the military or have had clearance at one point in time, and then after their service was done, going into the private sector and making millions off of knowledge that they knew and helping these privatized companies essentially, and like I said, making millions. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but so Trump is aware of that, what he's talking about, and I think he's trying to circumvent that.
But I think these are major changes that would have a lot of popular support, but people aren't able to say if your mother's milk of politics is effectively what keeps the system functioning is the green pieces of paper that capture the system. So I think that's not a Republican message or a Democrat message. It used to be a Democrat message, but it's not a Democrat message anymore. And one of the things that at least was cool about Donald Trump when he came around in 2016 is he actually was in 2016 on the debate stage the only person who said he would actually favor ending super PACs, which I like. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think could be a winning message for either side if they're willing to take it up today.
Do you think it's wise to go after the vice president's race or question Tim Walz's military background when you're trying to attract independents and moderates?
Just off that point alone, when race is brought up, it could be commented on by anyone. When Kamala's going to come in our face and be like, yeah, I'm one of y'all. I mean, essentially saying it without saying it, right? The pandering, you know, Quavo, Meg Thee Stallion, the Wakanda Forever. When she's going to come out and introduce race into the conversation, anybody's free to comment on it.
There's two different issues. Mm-hmm. Two different issues. And let me sort of say what I think would be the wise side of each and what's not the wise side of each. Mm-hmm. Going after Kamala Harris for being a flip-flopper or telling audiences what they want to hear, I think is a good line of attack because we don't know what her policies are. So she said a few years ago she's against fracking. Now she says she's not against fracking. A few years ago she said she wanted to have a single-payer healthcare system and a nationalized U.S. healthcare system and abolish private health insurance. She raised her hand when they said, do you favor abolishing private health insurance on the debate stage? She raised her hand. Now her advisors are saying, she won't say, but her advisors are saying she no longer believes that. So I think it's an interesting line of attack to say, are you just going to tell people what they want to hear, or are you going to tell your people what you actually believe about yourself and who you are? That, I think, is an interesting line of attack. And that could include some cultural elements. Going after her for what her racial identity is or isn't, I don't think that's a good line of attack. But the idea that are you somebody who's going to tell people your actual beliefs, or are you just going to tell whichever audience is in front of you what they want to hear, that I think is...
And this is kind of circling back to my point. Like Kamala, to this point, it doesn't seem like she's had any original policy, anything original, that she's injected to the campaign. Like, it's just like she's been going off of Joe's script. And that's all fine and dandy, and you would almost even expect that to a degree because she was his VP for 4 years. But that being said, now that she's in the limelight, the American citizen really needs to hear what Kamala Harris' personal stance and views are. Like, let's see what you think. How are you handling these issues?
It's valid. Tim Walz, going after him for any part of his military service to say that, oh, you didn't carry a big enough gun on the front line of fire and therefore you didn't serve the country, that's not a good line of attack. But I think an interesting and worthy line of attack is saying that, did you lie about it? Right? You don't have, there's no obligation in this country to serve in the military.
Yeah.
It's honorable if you do. But if you're going to say that you served in a war that you weren't in, then that...
And to your point, shout out everybody in the chat. Yeah, they say the DEI hire and affirmative action movements and actions, or they've been hijacked essentially. So while they were intended and maybe had black people in mind, other minority groups and such have benefited more, if not the same, if not more, from those policies.
It goes back to the question of honesty.
But doesn't that
draw those distinctions?
Doesn't that deflect from what Tim Walz, the issue that he's actually brought up, which is there shouldn't be any military-style assault weapons on the streets in the hands of civilians? Because that's really what he was talking about. To me, when you start bringing up...
Well, I think there's a few different things going on in the Tim Walz situation. There is evidence in interviews and otherwise that he suggested he served in Afghanistan when he didn't, and that he actually did know before that he was going to be called to Iraq before he decided to actually go run for Congress. I'm not in the business of questioning his service at all, but when you're asking the question, and you haven't heard me talk about this general topic in the media at all myself. But if you're asking me, is it fair game for Republicans to go after him for lying to the public? Yes. Is it smart or a good idea to go after him for military service? No. But I think that for lying to the public, for somebody who's going to be vice president of the United States, that is, I think, a
But it's
worthy
still
line of
deflecting
attack.
from the issue
It
of
does.
gun
And then-
violence.
Well, my whole thing is let's focus this on policy. Let's have a debate on the merits of policy and where you land. Now, Tim Walz, it's interesting. As a governor, you may or may not agree with the policies, but he is a governor who has increased the tax burden in Minnesota. He favors higher capital gains taxes for people who live in Minnesota. It's one of the highest tax states in the country. It's not California or New York. It's a Midwestern state, got by far the highest tax burden of anywhere in the Midwest. He is somebody who believes in a lot of the restrictions on fossil fuels. I don't know where you all are on that issue. I'm dead set against much of the climate change agenda because I think it leaves Americans of every political persuasion worse off. Tim Walz as a governor has been one of the most aggressive. Some people might like it. People like me don't. But he's been one of the most aggressive on implementing climate change policies, even at the state level. So those are legitimate lines of attack that I think we're not going hard enough on as Republicans because we're focused on other issues.
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Lauren.
I was going to say, well, back to
And,
Kamala. Do you
just
think
so
that?
everybody knows there is a vice presidential debate coming up between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz? I forget the exact date. I'll get that information for y'all. But that exact point that Vivek just made, him having to defend his stance on some of his issues or some of his points, we'll be able to tell, or we'll be able to tune in real soon and see what he has to say for himself.
Because you said like you can't get to her hard policy, but everybody's having so much conversation about her race and what she said versus what she didn't say, and
I think this actually helps Kamala, to be clear.
No, it does help
Even
her,
if
but
it
I'm
was
saying, do you
from
think
a
it's-
strategist perspective, from a Republican standpoint, she gives us a lot to focus on
October 1st.
by way of policy criticism. We're actually missing that opportunity right now. So I'd like to see that change in the next 3 months, and I think the country would be better off for it. I also don't favor, I said this even when Joe Biden was running for president.
October 1st.
So there's a pledge that the Republican Party required you to sign to be on the debate stage. Last year, so I did the Republican primary debate. It was called the Beat Biden Pledge. I said this is a nonsensical idea for two reasons. Okay, one is I don't think we're going to be running against Biden. Turns out that ends up being the case.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the second reason is
And it is crazy. Go back and look at Vivek's content from months ago. He called it, I want to say up to 6 months ago, he said that Biden would be dropping out and Kamala would be running in his place. Like, now you can say he had insider information, whatever. I don't care. But that boy called it out. And everybody said he was tripping. Everybody was like, but nah, now we see.
we're not going to succeed for the country or at the ballot box by just railing against the radical Biden agenda. We have to stand for our own vision for the country. What do we actually stand for, not just what are we against? And so if we make that same mistake with respect to Kamala Harris, I don't think we're running against an individual candidate. I think we're running against a machine.
Yeah.
And what I'd like to see as our vision is we want to go in and dismantle that machine. That's what Draining the Swamp was actually about. That's why you had that dragon energy in 2016. And I think there's nonpartisan, bipartisan interest in saying that, you know what, we do live in a country where a bureaucracy crushes the will of the citizens.
And it's so crazy to think that Kamala Harris, who a lot of y'all are considering voting in for president, and that's your American right, but the same woman who played mascot for the black people, the black community, the last 4 years as VP, they're parading around as the same mascot, pandering to y'all, telling y'all she's somebody you can identify with, hoping to get y'all hoping to get y'all vote, but we still ain't heard no policy from her. Vivek just said it perfectly. He summed it up as best as anyone could. It's a machine behind Kamala. If y'all think that anything she's saying or doing is original to Kamala Harris, it's a machine. She's going off of the Biden plan.
Go in and break that system. That's a powerful and I think unifying message. I'm not a big fan of going after just one individual candidate because it misses the point of what we're up against. For Kamala Harris's part, though, I think she owes the people of this country an answer. Where does she stand on nationalizing healthcare? Are you for it or are you against it? Where do you stand? This is a big one that people don't talk about. Affects small business owners, including black and white business owners across the country.
Okay.
She favors what's called a tax on unrealized capital gains. What that means is, even if you have a business, you're a businessman too, right? So you're operating a business, but take somebody who's maybe in a tougher position than you are. That means you have to pay taxes even when you don't have the cash to pay those taxes, because the government says that it's worth something and you have to pay 25% of that value every year. Well, what if you don't have the cash in your pocket? That forces you to either sell your business, take out a loan to pay taxes. That's a formula for real economic calamity. She has consistently supported that. That's what we need to be talking about. Are you still in favor of it? If so, why? Let's have that policy debate.
But
And I think that hiding from those issues.
What did he say?
Those of y'all who like just dumbfounded by what he just said. Yeah, it's a crazy concept, as a business owner and anybody who has entrepreneurial hopes is crazy to think money that you haven't yet calculated as earnings, you'd still be taxed on. Like, what?
Yes.
Hold on.
Something that leaves the American people holding the bag.
She'll get to that, I'm sure, when the debates come and everything else. And
We
when
only
she
have
does-
3 months.
When she does interviews. I agree with that. I want to ask you a thing about the flip-flopping, too. Isn't that what politicians do, though? And what I mean by that is J.D. Vance was calling Trump America's Hitler,
And now that
right? But now he
the stage or the date for the Kamala and Trump debate, we might not hear from her till then. I mean, she's already given us a date when she's gonna come out and have to answer our questions. Like, I'm sure they'll let the hype build up till then. I don't see a reason why they have her do a solo interview or ask her any really pressing questions and she actually answers them. I think we probably won't hear anything in depth from Kamala until that debate.
when it comes to Trump, he's a hawk to a girl.
I was
Like
talk-
he's just, he's sucking them off every chance he gets. And that's what a lot of y'all do. Like just politicians in general. You hear so many different Republicans have said so many negative things about Donald Trump, but then as soon as he becomes the nominee, everybody just falls in line.
And normally they fall in line in unison, and you can rage against the machine. It doesn't feel like Trump and Vance are like it's not there. Like
So what do you call that? Is that flip-flopping?
So here's what I will say is it fair game to press J.D. Vance hard on why he said certain things about Donald Trump before versus what his view is on Donald Trump today? Yes, I think that's fair game.
Mm-hmm.
And has he been pressed and has he answered for that? Yes, he has. What I would love to see is both candidates, and Kamala Harris hasn't done this yet, and I'd love to challenge her to do it. I think it's good for the voters of the country. She hasn't sat down for one media interview of a hard-pressing one-on-one variety yet. And she's actually the leading candidate now in many of the polls for U.S. president. So I just think we deserve a country where the people are willing to show up. She should show up here. She should show up on CNBC, where I was this morning, and actually engage in hard questions about what her beliefs are. You saw JD, say what you will, on
Watched
3
them all
shows
day yesterday.
pressed on
Watched them.
exactly that very issue. And I think that's good for the American people to then be able to make.
They ask him that almost any time he sits down for a one-on-one. Even the J.D. Vance interview that we covered here on this channel, like, oh, well, you said some pretty harsh things. You're critical things of Trump a few years ago. What makes you, turn the tide and support him now, be his vice president now? And he's answered for it, like Vivek said. But it's funny how they don't question Kamala about anything that she had to do or that she has done in the past 4 years as our VP. I mean, well, she hasn't really given them a chance to. Like Vivek just said, she hasn't taken any meetings or any interviews, but it's funny because they're on J.D. Vance about his stance on Trump 4 years ago as a senator, but they're not on Kamala about where she's been at these last 4 years as a VP.
Make their own judgment. It's not your judgment or the journalist's judgment, but it's what people at home are able to see to assess. Do I actually believe somebody who believes they changed their mind over the course of time? Kamala Harris might have changed her mind, and I think it's okay. Flip-flopping is one thing, changing your mind thoughtfully is another. But you deserve to be questioned on it, and it's up to the voters to decide whether or not they believe you. Right now, we're not getting that chance. And I do think it is, you're saying, well, hopefully we're going to see that. I'm not sure yet that we will. It's been about a solid month that Kamala Harris has been the presumptive nominee. We got the convention coming up, this coming week, next week. I think it is vital for the health of this country that the same treatment that the media gave Joe Biden in that last few weeks after his debate, they didn't do that for 3 years.
Yeah.
For 3 years, we missed that. The fact that it took that early debate and Donald Trump demolishing him in that debate for the country to suddenly wake up and say that Joe Biden is not a functioning U.S. president is actually a damning indictment of the entire media and its relationship to the political class. So we can't make that same mistake with Kamala Harris. I think the media needs to demand that she at least face the same kind of questioning that, frankly, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump are getting right now. And then the public it's up to them to decide. That's a functioning democracy.
But because you're not implying by her not doing the interviews and based off of the way that Biden was treated in those last couple of weeks, you're not implying that you don't think she's competent.
And even once we get to the debate stage, it is kind of funny to think that the questions Kamala will be getting asked, it'll be the same questions Donald Trump has to answer himself. So on a one-on-one interview, these are pressing questions, Americans' looming questions. We want to know what you specifically have to say about this. We haven't got that from Kamala, and I don't even know if we're promised to get that from her. Like I said, we probably won't hear from her at all until the debate. And then beyond that, I don't know, man. She's just not. First of all, she's not the interview type. We've seen her interviews; they're not looking that well, and her PR team is aware of that. So, I mean, it might be smart for her to honestly avoid an interview. The more I think about it,
Competent to be the president of the United States, right?
I'm saying the media is covering for her right now the same way they covered for Biden for 3 years.
You think they're covering, or you think that she's just using her
They're
own
not playing
strategy?
hard. They're not paying this. She's using a strategy. Okay, I think she's using some smart.
Which politicians do.
That's fine, but I think it's the media's job now to cut through that strategy and say this person very well could be the president of the United States. Has at least a 50% chance right now, according to most forecasts, of being the next president. She deserves to be questioned, not with kid gloves, but questioned with the gloves off on what exactly her policy vision is for the country. Until that happens, I think the voters are hiding in the dark. And that's what allows the machine to work, because we know she's questioned a lot on that behind closed doors.
no politician,
Who's funding the campaigns of both parties? You know, behind closed doors, a lot of donors ask a lot of questions. That's how you raise hundreds of millions of dollars in just 1 month. The voting public deserves that same level of transparency. And one of the things I will, say what you will about, you could criticize either side. I like that Donald Trump showed up at the Libertarian Party convention, right? That's a third party. They had a convention. I actually spoke there. He spoke there as well the next night. I like that he spoke to the National Association of Black Journalists in Chicago.
Yeah.
I'd love for Kamala Harris to show up at the National Association.
In Chicago. Don't let that go over your head. In Chicago, do your homework.
Association of Black Journalists.
Well, she wanted to, but they wouldn't let her do the virtual thing. Yeah, she does have a day job.
But the day
She's still
job,
vice president.
No, but the day job is running. Come on. At this point, she is going full time, reading off a teleprompter at the rallies, the same thing 4 times a day. She should show up for that interview. If Donald Trump sits down with the National Association of Black Journalists, I'm sorry, a scheduling excuse is not a valid reason for the
don't we know
competitor to also show up.
But if Kamala, not to cut you off, I'm sorry. If Kamala sits down with NABJ, we know where she's.
And they didn't even mention that Kamala wasn't going to show up. They didn't give her a hard time. They didn't admonish her for being tardy or absent. I mean, but best believe if Trump was late, oh, you know what? And the added kicker to that is they had equipment delay issues. So the interview started 30 minutes after it was supposed to. Now imagine if Trump didn't show up, he was absent, or he was tardy, like, oh, my bad, I had this, and that going on. They would have roasted him for it. They would have completely roasted him for it.
He's going conversation-wise, right? I think it's honestly,
not necessarily true. I don't think that's true. I think the person who did that interview for Donald Trump, if they had taken the same approach with respect to Kamala Harris, I think that'd actually be pretty good conversation for the country.
I don't know if she would. I want to see the vice president on Fox News.
Yeah, I think she should go across the room.
Even better. Even better, right? So one of the things I liked, I mean, Donald Trump went to the Bronx. People could say it wasn't the real Bronx or whatever, but he showed up in the Bronx. He showed up in the South Bronx. Showed up in inner cities in the country. Even in my own campaign, I went to the south side of Chicago, went to a room full of, 95% black, 95% Democrat, not a traditional Republican primary location. I went to Kensington in the inner city of Philadelphia. Speaking as a former candidate.
Kensington? Ooh. Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. Somebody as an Ohioan who's close to Philadelphia. Yeesh. I ain't gonna lie. Kensington, they go down, boy.
Myself, I can tell you those trips had an impact on me. Right? It had an impact on my view of a national unity that I believe is possible in this country that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't showed up there. I'd love to see Kamala Harris go into rural Mississippi, go into Alabama, showing up at a Fox News moderated town hall.
Well, she does do that. Now, we can't act like she doesn't do that. I mean, even the past week, she hit all of the battleground states, and she's actually hitting the street, which I think in a lot of ways is more effective right now than sitting.
Is she getting in these rooms? Is she sitting down and touching the people, as they say? Or is she getting on a rally stage and just spewing her mantra, and I mean, I don't know. It's like a pep rally. Like, who's not happy and cheering at a pep rally? Like, anybody can look good sitting center stage at a pep rally. But like I said, when you get in these rooms and you have to answer some of these pressing questions, you got to talk to the people. When you got to hear their qualms. You got to comfort disgruntled Americans who got pressing questions about what the country's about to look like for the next 4 years. Like, and you got to answer them questions, Johnny, on the spot. Yeah, Kamala, she ain't did that, and I don't know if she can.
With hostile questioning, though, is not. I want to see her
See?
answer questions from people who disagree with her.
Boom.
That's what the country's founded on. All right, so face off with the people you disagree with.
So like town halls, you mean?
Yeah, town halls.
I'm not mad at that.
and or hostile journalists. And here's why: when you stop talking
Not
to people,
hostile, hard hitting.
hard hitting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm about to say, because you see a black woman in a hostile situation. Did you see that when you went to them places? She gonna know how to handle it. She gonna be good.
I hope so. We'll see. I hope so for the country. But here's what I will say: is when you stop talking to people who disagree with you, it becomes a lot easier to demonize them.
I agree.
And,
I agree with that.
that's what happens in the country. So say what you will about, I know we probably have different views on who we're voting for this cycle, but I will say more so than most Republicans, and in this cycle more so than the Democratic opponent, Donald Trump has talked to people who disagree with him, faced off more
agree with you.
than Kamala Harris has, and I think she has a couple months left to see if she has it in her to level up. If you want to sit across the table from Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin, then you better be willing to sit across the table from your fellow Americans who disagree with you and face that questioning
you
too.
have to be
And that's
able
my
to
challenge
as
to
a
her.
world
If she does
leader.
that,
As a president, hopeful elect, you should be able to sit down and people in rooms where people don't see your policy how you see it, or people that disagree with you, answer some of their questions, and hopefully convert some of those people. That should be one of your skills as a politician, as a statesman, is to be able to get in these, as Vivek said, hostile environments, calm the crowd, answer tough questions, and hopefully convert some folks to your program, to your ism.
I'm not going to say I'm going to vote for her, but because I disagree with her on the policies, but I will respect her as a candidate in a way that I don't until she actually does
So
it.
you're not just going to support your fellow Indian because she's an Indian?
I'm weak.
Well, I would say that one of the things actually funny you bring that up.
You what?
I believe we're all American. We got to vote in policy, of course. A lot of the Indian American community is a little bit disappointed or a little bit offended, at least at the fact that she doesn't really own that part of her identity
That's not
anymore
true. Why
in
do
the way
y'all
she
say
did
that?
before, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just
Wow.
owns both.
I'm don't believe.
Wow, nah, that's a hitter. That's a banger. You telling me Vivek, who is Indian American himself, is speaking on behalf of the Indian community and saying they low-key feel a type of way that Kamala just chose to switch up right now. Conveniently, like back in the day, to put on for us, but now that she's center stage trying to run for president, she over here trying to say she one of y'all. Like,
blame a messenger, but I'm telling you, you can take it as a fact that a good, at least in my read of it, I think a lot of Indian Americans do have a little bit of disappointment about that. My whole view is I don't like identity politics, period, right? One direction or another. We got to revive our shared American identity. Okay, and so if we are really committed to the ideals of this country, I think we should focus on what policies are you advancing, regardless of your race, regardless of your skin color. So whether she's dealing with a tax or she's dealing with leaning into it, I'm against it in both forms. Forget the identity politics around the board and focus on how you're going to have policies that lift up all Americans. That's what I favor talking about. But since you bring it up, don't
That's
shoot the
the
messenger
American
here.
dream, but-
I think there are some Indian Americans out there that do feel some sense of offense about
Well,
it.
I want to tell Indian Americans that's not true. She claims both sides, black and Indian. And this is my last question because I know you got to go. What were your thoughts when Ann Coulter told you that she wouldn't vote for you because you're Indian? She told you that verbatim.
Yes, you are an Indian, is what she said. So look, I think it's shameful. I disagree with it deeply. But one of the things that I think we need more of in this country, the only thing worse than that, is her not saying it, but that actually being a true fact for why many people wouldn't vote for me.
But it's a lot of
So
people
let's
in
get
the
it out in the
party.
open, and
a lot
let's
of
talk
people in
about
the
it.
party who look at you like that, though. I mean, it's the same party that would make racist jokes about you, draw the racist cartoons.
Well, here's one of the things I actually haven't mentioned this before. One of the things that bothered me a little bit in the campaign is maybe it's because of my style or whatever. A lot of people in the Republican primary base would say, "Oh, he's just telling us what we want to hear," and I don't think that he actually means it or believes it. I got that a lot actually. I thought about it after the race. If I really wanted to tell you what you wanted to hear, do you think I would tell you that I'm a Hindu who practices with my beliefs without changing or shortening my last name? So if I'm going to stick to that, you have a lot of politicians in American politics, including other people on that debate stage that have changed their name, some who have evolved their religion.
And for those of y'all who might not fully grasp what he's saying, it's a very bold move for him to enter politics and keep his ethnic last name, his cultural last name. Like, he could have probably appeased to a wider base, a wider crowd, had he just changed his name to a little bit something a little bit more American, so to speak. But nah, he kept the last name, the last name he was born with, and just kind of rocked it. And I respected him for that, because I heard people say that, and I thought that myself, like, damn, he probably could have appealed to more people had he changed his name. But stayed true to himself and kept the name.
I haven't done any of those things. So if I wanted to tell you something that was going to make it easier for me to win, those would be the number one and two things that you would do. But my view is you got to be who you are. And I am somebody who has my own beliefs. And I am proud of not only my faith, because it guides me to make the decisions I do, but who I am and how I got to where I am. Now, I think in the long run, and I've met many people in the Republican primary base across the entire country, I think in the long run, people do respect that level of authenticity and commitment. And so are there going to be a lot of people who, on either side of the spectrum, to say, I can't vote for you for some silly reason? Sure. But I'm not going to be a victim over that. You know what? If I'm running to be president of the United States, I can't blame the media. I certainly can't blame the voters. It's my job to actually give people a reason to say, you know what, you might have believed what you did before, but here's your reason to think about it a little bit differently. And I think we did bring along a lot of people who believed they could have never voted for a Hindu, who said that, you know what, if he shares the same value set that I do and is actually going to advance the country and allow me to be religiously free, I think there were a few people who we brought along that way, more than a few people.
And that's what you can respect about Vivek as well, is yes, he kept his name. Yes, he came in with his culture, his heritage, but he doesn't infringe on anybody else's rights. He's not impeding on anybody else's beliefs. He believes that you should have the freedom to practice your religious beliefs. Just like he has the freedom to be a Hindu, you should have the freedom to be a Christian, a Muslim, and practice that without the fear of religious persecution and, all your other American rights. So
over the course of the campaign. And, I think one of the things I learned is I preach this to the left all the time, right? Is that I won't say that you're the only person who's responsible for your destiny, because there's always external factors that hold you back, external prejudices or whatever. You and I, in our last conversation, talked about this a lot in the Black community, but you could say the same thing in this context. You're talking about me and my race for president. Okay, maybe you're not the sole determinant of what you achieve in life. Fine. But the most important determinant of what you're able to achieve in life is still you. There are other factors, but the number one factor that determines whether or not you succeed or achieve your goals is you. So for me, now I got to preach that hard truth to myself. Are there a lot of factors that were uphill factors for me in this race, including my last name being harder to remember or to pronounce, the fact that I'm Hindu, which you haven't had a Hindu president before, a lot of other reasons why? Sure. But the number one reason why I wasn't successfully elected comes still down to me. And I got to look and confront myself in the mirror and ask myself what I could have done better to succeed. And so same message I'm going to preach to the left or preach to the other side. I'm going to try to practice it.
He was facing an uphill battle. I would say that this just wasn't his election cycle. Yeah, you was running up the big dog and against Trump. So, yeah, that was an uphill battle for him. Maybe next election cycle. He has some good policy. I think he's progressive in a lot of the things he says, while still holding traditionally conservative and the other half of the things he says. So I like Vivek.
It's in my own life as well. If you want to be the leader of the country, it's up to you to level up and actually explain to people why you believe that your vision is going to be best for them. And you know what? It was a hell of an experience, and I wouldn't trade it off for anything. It's been probably the most challenging but most enriching thing I've done in my life was the last year of traveling this country, meeting people of all creeds, all political persuasion, all races, strengthened me. And you know what? Whatever I do next, I'm going to be stronger for it. And we're figuring that out right now.
So with all that being said, you think the Republican Party will have a person of color as a presidential nominee at some point?
I think it's entirely possible. Yeah, I think it's entirely possible in the near future. Even if you look at even 2016, Ben Carson at one point led in the polls. If you look at 2012, number one for a little while was Herman Cain as well. And that's 2012. I think we're even different in 2024 relative to 2012. Frankly,
It's so funny that the claims on the Republican Party is that they're prejudiced and racist when if you really think about it, if you really dig deep, like that's actually the pot calling the kettle.
even in the race that I had, I mean, I was running, briefly ahead of Ron DeSantis at the early parts of the debates that put me at number 2 next to Donald Trump at certain points in the race. So were there some headwinds for me? You got Ann Coulter's comment. Was that representative of a broader current? Yeah, that exists. But was that the reason why I did not succeed, or am I going to pin the blame on that? No. I think it comes down to everybody has their own unique challenges. People have biases of all kinds. It comes in a lot of different flavors. But if you're running to lead the country, it's up to you to overcome that. Is that surmountable? Yeah, I believe it is. And do I think that at some point in our lifetime, you're going to have somebody who is not a white man be the Republican nominee and successfully elected U.S. president as a Republican? I think definitely. I think overwhelmingly likely.
I think they should have made Nikki Haley the nominee this year.
I disagree with that.
Or put her as vice president. It would have been a tougher ticket to beat than this.
I mean, I disagree with that based on ideology because she and I have.
You mean Nikki Haley, the warmonger? Yeah, former chair member of Boeing. You mean her?
Deep-seated different views about our appetite to enter.
Your views are different
conflict.
than Trump.
Nikki Haley, the one that was signing the bombs that they were dropping on Gaza. Okay.
Yeah, I have a lot of different views than Trump.
You don't really like Trump's politics, Vivek.
Well, I've been very clear that I don't agree with Trump on 100% of policies. I ran for president. For a year, I was making clearly the case of where I have some slightly different policy views than Donald Trump. Hopefully that makes actually my reason for endorsing him at least credible to the people who followed me during the race to say, I'm not changing my policy positions. I still don't agree with him on 100% of policies, but I'm voting for him nonetheless because I think he's going to grow the economy and solve the illegal mass migration crisis, which I do think is hurting this country. And I think those are the two issues that matter most to the next 4 years.
It kills me, though. I don't care what side you're on. Isn't it kind of funny? Isn't it kind of hilarious how immigration, the border, immigrants in general is like a major talking point in every election cycle? I mean, just look back to the last 4 years. What was Trump saying? I'm gonna build a wall and I'm gonna have Mexico pay for it. Like, it just seems to always be at the forefront of what these people are talking about. And they get us every cycle. Because you feel some type of way about it. Either you're pro-immigration or you're not so pro-immigration. And you feel some type of way about it every cycle. So they use that. They use it and they use it against us.
Of our development. When I think about the future, this actually, we don't cover this ground, and maybe you guys aren't interested in this either, but I think there are different flavors of America First beneath the surface, simmering right now. I think it's interesting. It's in the very early stages of this.
And it sways our vote.
On one strain of America First, it's the idea that we need to protect American manufacturers from the effects of foreign price competition, that we need to protect American labor from the effects of legal immigration into the country. I'm not so much in that camp. I'm in the camp of America First that says the federal bureaucracy is actually the main thing holding back this country. So I don't want to replace the left-wing nanny state with a right-wing nanny state. I want to actually shut down the nanny state. I don't want to replace the left-wing regulatory state with a right-wing regulatory state to advance so-called good goals. I actually just want to dismantle the regulatory state. And that's an interesting... There's two different currents within even the America First wing of the Republican Party.
He's cooking.
And I think we're going to be at our best if we have those debates in the open. In the same way that I would say about a Democrat, somebody who has different...
He says regulatory states. Y'all, I hope y'all know he's referring to these censoring overlords, I'll say, the people who restrict and limit what we say or... what we put out on some of these platforms.
Views than me, but is actually willing to defend them and say, this is my ideology. That's great. We are allowed to have different ideologies. But what I don't have a ton of patience for is a lot of politicians who refuse to acknowledge that they have an ideology or they don't have one at all. And that goes to my challenge, not just to fellow Republicans, but to Kamala Harris as well. It's not that she's a Marxist. I have no idea if she's a Marxist. Just tell me what your actual beliefs are so we can have an honest debate. That's when the country's best off. And you're right. Within the Republican Party, I do represent a set of views where I don't agree with 100% of what a lot of other prominent Republicans say.
Yeah.
But for my part, I'm willing to defend that. And, I'm biased, but I think this idea of taking on the regulatory state, personally, I do think that is the way of the future for even the Republican Party when you play this forward, 4, 8, 10 years down the line.
Vivek Ramaswamy, y'all. Always a pleasure, sir.
Good to see you guys.
I like when you pull up. Let's just,
Great interview. Definitely always a good time hearing Vivek talk politics and kind of the direction America's headed in. I thought he was a good candidate in this past here run. It was probably just timing wasn't the best, him running against Trump, but I think he has a good shot at the next election cycle, and I think he has a good shot of winning primary for Republicans. And I just think he's he would be a fresh look for America. He'd be a progressive, like I said, a progressive yet somewhat traditionally conservative candidate, and I think we need some of that. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Pick some game up. Make sure to like the video on the way out. It's S.E.T Key Media, man. You got Key in here, your favorite big four-headed YouTuber, man. I'm gonna sign out on this one, man. I'll be right back with more. Peace.